Hi, everyone. Hello. Welcome into the space if you're just now joining. I'm Sam. I'll be presenting today. Sasha will be on tech. And we have a few questions that we'd like you to enter in the chat. So just name, pronouns, what agency, organization you're coming from. And the icebreaker question that we came up with today is what questions you ask to get to know someone. So feel free to enter all of that in the chat whenever you're ready. Hello to those who just joined. Just have an icebreaker up here. Name, pronouns, agency, organization, and what questions you ask to get to know someone. So feel free to enter that into the chat. I already see some great responses. Thank you. And we'll get started in just a minute. See a lot of familiar names and faces, so welcome back. Happy New Year. Hey, yeah, while folks continue to trickle in, I think we're going to get started. So I'm Sam Burles. I work at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Hopefully you know that if you're in the space to get today with us, Sasha will be helping out with Zoom tech and support. And we have a couple other CE members on the call as well. But welcome everyone. This is our first community engagement conversation of the year. Very exciting. So again, this is the icebreaker. I believe Sasha had included it in the chat. Yeah, feel free to continue. So we're going to just go over some quick group agreements. So the first one is listening for understanding, not disagreement. Consider the opinions and experiences of others. Bring a spirit of experimentation and creativity. Step up and step back. So that means taking turns for speaking, making room for others to speak, and to have fun. Hopefully this will be a little more experimental, fun space for today. And this is our agenda for today. So we are going to start off with some introductions, which we're already doing, an overview, some historical context of relationship building, the purpose of relationship building, some tactics that go into relationship building, a couple of scenario exercises and share outs, and just closing out the session. So what is MAPC? I'm sure some of you are familiar, but for those who are not, we are a regional planning agency, and we serve about 101 cities and towns in the metropolitan Boston region. On the right, you can see the map of the regions that we serve. And then some of the areas of work that we include in our work include arts and culture, clean energy, community engagement, economic development, and transportation. The list goes on. Yep. So a couple of objectives for our series essentially are to create a space for attendees to share their barriers they face around community engagement, and just being able to make the space more of like a networking and educational setting for those who attend our these series. But our specific objectives for today include developing a shared understanding of MAPC's community engagement relationship building strategies, sharing how MAPC applies relationship building in projects and initiatives, hearing about how you will apply relationship building in your respective work, and creating relationships with fellow attendees. So you really want to build out this space to make sure that you all can get to know one another outside of this space as well. But just a quick recap of our last CE conversation that occurred in November that was led by Naji Nunali, also in the CE team, on the community engagement process. So if we see this kind of like wheel like graphic over on the screen, there's a few points such as purpose, landscape analysis, resources, communications, and approach. And I feel like for the most part for today's session, landscape analysis and more of the communications and approach will be touched upon the most, especially when talking about relationship building. And essentially the point of this process is to be able to ask these questions throughout your project work or even just like relationship building, getting to know someone. So with that, why build relationships? So just some brief historical context on relationship building. This is not a process that, you know, we as a team or even as an agency had come up with. There are folks long before us who have been doing relationship building work. And it's important to acknowledge that we continue to build upon the work that they have done because we've seen the significance of it historically. So we know that BIPOC and other marginalized groups haven't typically been included in planning processes. So an example that I pulled out from The Color of Law, incredible book if you haven't read it yet, is on the Homeowners Loan Corporation, or the HOLC. So essentially, I believe in California, the HOLC made it difficult for Black families and created just barriers in them being able to apply for loans or making loans very unrealistically high for them in order to essentially gatekeep where they were able to live regionally in the state. But again, we know that relationship building has historically made engagement efforts stronger among community members. So we look at movements even like the civil rights movement and the labor rights movement. They were able to build connections and relationships with one another and started off with a common goal. And they took that and were able to either connect each other with one another or just create a stronger foundation. And because of being able to do that, as we've seen the social implications and the improvements that those movements had made by being able to, you know, relationship build. So again, it didn't start with us. And again, we know that relationship building historically can be extractive, not necessarily inclusive. So either whether it's in research or you know, in policy, specifically in government, being able to extract information and, you know, data or whatnot from community members and not being either able to follow up with them, being transparent with them, or just generally, you know, not including them in the process is a big issue that we have even to this day. So that's something that we are also trying to remedy in our work at MAPC. So if we look over here, we have the purpose of relationship building. So MAPC and the CE team's goal has been to include relationship building as a crucial part of our work. And as we understand the harm that the planning field and government has inflicted, particularly to historically excluded groups. So again, referring to my previous slide, we know that because of the extractive nature of both government and the planning field, we unfortunately, community members and residents of historically excluded communities don't feel like they can trust, you know, government or municipal staff that come into their communities, and the disconnect just continues to either stay the same or exacerbate. So I created these three little bubbles over here. We have like establishing trust as one purpose of relationship building. So a couple of examples of that is just, again, being able to build that trust and understanding. And we need to also acknowledge the fact that that can take some time, and being able to be patient and, you know, empathetic to being able to build that trust over time. The opportunity to create relationships with external partners beyond typical stakeholders. So not necessarily just focusing on strengthening relationships with those that you already have relationships with, but being able to venture out and, you know, explore other community-based organizations and residents. Learning. So creating room for diversity of thoughts and sharing and resource sharing, the opportunity to learn about the existing social fabric of a community. So again, knowing that there already is a social fabric that exists, and not necessarily going into a community to speak with their residents or community-based organizations with the intention of, you know, changing anything or even making suggestions, but really wanting to listen in and learn from those community members. And sorry, ensuring that marginalized groups are included in all parts of the planning process. So again, to prevent some of that disconnect and for the sake of transparency as well, making sure that marginalized groups feel like they can, you know, be included again in all parts of the planning process, but also understand like the different parts of the planning process as well. And with connections, we have, sorry, to create opportunities to bridge new relationships and networks, and to create I think I wrote that twice, but to create opportunities to bridge new relationships and networks is a big one. So again, being able to resource share and connect individuals to one another who you think might have similar interests in regards to the work that they do, and that also you do. Okay, so this is the CE team's community engagement strategy that we use. So when we kind of look at who we are trying to do relationship building work with, we typically start with either like municipal staff and leadership. So that could be like community leaders, just like town planners, mainly, yeah, municipal staff in any city or town. And then we have organizational engagement. So that can include community-based organizations, faith-based associations, and just general like popular, and also not, it can be big and small associations within the town. And then even like more specific targeted community engagement. So looking at being able to speak to community members who, again, are like part of either historically marginalized groups or who might be directly impacted by whether it's a plan or a specific problem. So why do we try to build relationships? So again, we acknowledge the fact that in planning and in this context, we know that marginalized or historically excluded groups have been not a part of these processes. So ensuring that that is in planning, we are able to do remedy some of that. So these are some of the groups that these are some of the examples, like previously to the slide before, of the groups that we try to build relationships with. So community-based organizations, municipal staff and partners, and just general residents. And then again, we have some of those groups who have been historically excluded. So immigrant populations, LGBTQIA plus populations, and BIPOC communities. And again, ensuring that not the same residents are constantly being targeted in these processes. So, you know, maybe wealthier white communities, for example, they're historically have been the ones who have shown up to and been educated on a lot of planning processes. And even just, again, acknowledging that not everyone is situated the same. Everyone should be included and have access to planning, like regardless of who you are in the community. And then these are some tactics and strategies of relationship building that have worked, that I have personally been using and continue to use in my work. I'm thinking of just a couple of municipalities I've worked on using some of these strategies with, and they have seemed to be successful. So looking beyond a flyer and thinking about what creative ways can you do outreach. So whether that's cold emailing, asking, you know, municipal staff out for a coffee chat, attending community events, even just like listening and learning and making sure that we're actively listening when we're having conversations. So looking during conversations, keeping track of conversation themes and seeing what comes up and being able to ask those relevant questions is kind of like an indicator of this person is listening to me. And creates, again, more of a more welcoming environment to create some of those stronger relationships. Resource sharing. So being able to connect individuals with other connections and relevant resources. So if I'm speaking to someone about language access, I would point them to, the language access work that Sasha and Naji have been doing on the CE team and sending that over to them because we've already established that there's an interest in that. Um, Reciprocity. So ensuring that conversations are productive for both parties. So, I put establishing conversation goals prior to conversations, but this isn't necessarily in a way of checkboxing of, yes, this is what we're aiming to speak about during this conversation, but more so of like, if you are reaching out to someone to have a conversation, make sure that, it's not, a waste of their time and they make sure and they feel like the conversation is as fruitful for them as it can be for you. And just generally showing up to community events and meetings with those who have either invited you to those events or just seeing like what events are happening in the cities and the towns that of those that you have spoken to. That makes a world of a difference. I've done it myself. And it's always a shock for those residents and those staff that I've spoken to actually see me show up to those events. So we're going to start some relationship building in this space today. We're going to be doing a waterfall exercise in the chat. So a waterfall exercise is we have the question over here of what are your successes and challenges with relationship building with historically excluded communities. You write your responses in the chat, but don't hit send yet. I will tell you all when you can hit send. So just take a minute. Feel free to reread that question and just think of some responses, and I will tell you all when to hit send. Okay, are you ready to hit send? Perfect. And now we can all hit send. I'm going to be reading out some of the responses. So we have without acknowledging the value of the lived experiences of a lived experience, acknowledging folks for the time they're spending or alleviating barriers folks may have for participation. Smaller town circumstances, not easy to find the excluded communities or representatives for them. That's a good one. Success is happy to know our department exists and there are resources. Also happy to know that city staff took initiative to seek them out and ask for feedback/input. And a challenge with that is a mistrust from previous interactions, therefore hesitant to participate in future conversations. Read a couple more. We have one of constant communication. Yep, we've heard that a few times. Time and resources. Okay. Thank you, everyone. These are great responses. And before we continue, do we have any questions? I know this is a lot of content.
Yeah, Sam, one question that I'll just raise and that came up in the chat, and folks, please feel free to add additional questions if you have them. We have about 5 minutes for questions. But one question that came up in the chat is, how do you define extractive? So some things that people responded was coming to people and asking them to give input when we're not recognizing them for that time, or helping alleviate barriers to participate, or asking them for valuable input, gaining that information, and then not coming back to that community. Is there anything else that you would add about extractive that you think is important for people to know?
Yeah, I don't think this is exactly by the definition extractive, but accessibility is a big one. So again, you mentioned barriers. So even like a lot of town meetings happen in the evenings. Some people might not either be able to work because attend because they have work in the evenings, or they're not able to get childcare, or they happen during dinner time. Are we, providing food at these events or at these meetings? Or are we compensating them with either, gift cards or what have you, to be able to, thank them for their time. So I think those are more of the direct examples that come to mind for me. Any other questions? Perfect. So we're going to be doing a scenario exercise. So we have two scenarios. The first one is Kate has been working on MAPC's public health team for 2 years. She is set to start a new project with the city of Metroland beginning June of 2025, but both the community engagement budget and time for the project are limited. How should Kate work on building relationships with Metroland prior to the project or at the start time of the project as well? And the first scenario will be, or the second scenario is Jason, a new city planner for his city, is hoping to start relationship building with the youth in the city in preparation for the city's upcoming arts and culture plan. However, some of the city's public school staff have expressed concern and skepticism with municipal staff engaging with students, since they feel like in the past, the engagement was not beneficial for students. How should Jason proceed with building relationships with the city's youth? So we have those two scenarios. You would pick one of two. And then with the instructions, we're going to be creating multiple breakout groups. We'll be making groups of about 3 or 4. And those groups will be for about 10 minutes. And we'll come back to share out in the main room for about 5 minutes. And if we could have someone just to jot down notes, we don't have the shared PowerPoint, but if we could just have someone to jot down notes and then share out, that would be great. But we would love for you all to share, go around and introduce yourselves first, and then discuss your chosen scenarios.
Great. Thanks, Sam. I have dropped the scenarios in the chat for your reference, so feel free to copy that if you need it. We're going to open the rooms now.
Thank you, Sasha.